Welcome, friends, to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock-flavoured podcast. On this show, we're delving into something that, on first glance, may not appear to have too many connections with the usual subject matter for this podcast. However, on closer inspection, those overlaps position it as well in scope, and it's just a great piece of art, encompassing film, music, and a bloody good paperback book too. Music journalist and writer Joe Banks is back for this one, taking a break from his coming Peter Hamill book to talk about one of the great curiosities of the British music industry that also happens to be one of the best films about the rock business in the 60s and 70s you'll ever see. We're talking about the 1975 Slade vehicle, Flame, a move into film that they hoped would build upon their incredible early 70s record of 17 consecutive top 20 hits, 3 number 1 albums, 6 number 1 singles, and a Christmas single that sold over 1 million copies in 1973 alone. A film they intended would boost their credibility as serious artists with integrity, and not just the flamboyant and garish glam rock band that dominated Top of the Pops for a few years. Accompanying the film was a cracking novelisation by John Pidgeon, and we'll take a good look at that too, before finally, Phil and I watch the newly released BFI Blu-ray, the first ever HD release of Flame, and Phil tells me why she loves the film so much, and the album too. So lock the door, hold fast against the tide of urban modernisation, stub out your player's number 6, grab a large scotch, or a baby sham, and join us in Derry and Toms as we take a look at Slade in Flame. I mean, as it happens, it's not really been that much of a problem because while we've been getting sorted, I've been chugging Sam Smith's brown ale because I thought when I was watching the film, I watched the film again earlier on today with my tea, and that opening scene at the wedding where they're all drinking bitter out of those tiny little half-pint pots. I thought, what's the most suitable beer to drink with this film? And I just thought brown ale. It's a brown ale kind of film.
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So I mean,
I'm drinking Japanese lager, which is probably the last thing you should be drinking with it.
Well, perhaps Slade were really popular in Japan at some point. I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest.
Yeah, they sound like they're the kind of band that you think that might have had like a Japanese, almost like the Spinal Tap thing when they get back together and go to Japan, but I'm not sure actually.
I'm going to look this up later on. We've given the game away a little bit, but you know what? Before we get into what we're going to talk about, welcome back, Joe. Welcome back to Derry and Toms. What have you been working on?
What have I been working on? So for the last 2.5 years, I've been doing my Peter Hamill book, and that is now pretty much finished. It's not 195,000 words, so that's about 600 pages. So that's finished effectively, and I'm just gathering visual material at the moment, and then it's going to start being designed in a couple of weeks' time. And then hopefully, I thought it was going to be out for summer, but I think it looks like it's probably going to be towards the end of the year now. But it is definitely coming. So that has taken up a lot of my time. So that's the main thing I focused on. But I've also just had a cover feature for Prog as well. Prog magazine asked me to do a 50th anniversary on Hawkwind's Warrior on the Edge of Time. So that's currently on the front cover. They did a very nice illustration for it based on the cover and based on actually the advertising artwork. And I'm very pleased with that. So always nice to be asked to do that. I think Jerry Ewing, the editor of Prog, I think Warrior is either his favourite Hawkwind album or it's his favourite album, full stop.
Yeah.
So bit of a shoe-in, but yeah, nice to be asked.
It's amazing really to think, isn't it, that I think so Warrior came out 75, the same year that this film came out that we're going to talk about.
Exactly. It came out about 3 months after the film.
What a coincidence. Well, and what a year for music and interest in films, because obviously we've given the game away already, but we're going to be talking about Slade's 1975 hard look at the inside of the music business, their film Flame. But I think before we talk about the film, we've got to talk about Slade, haven't we? So, Joe, bearing in mind that not everybody who listens to this podcast, number one, was old enough to be watching Top of the Pops in the 70s, or number two, are even English. I think some of our Australian listeners and perhaps our Canadian listeners who've got a lot of British telly over there will probably be dimly aware of Slade if they're of a certain age. Everybody in the UK has heard Merry Christmas, Everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Or is Merry Christmas, Everyone? Have I got the song title wrong? Merry Christmas, Everyone.
I think it's yeah.
Yeah. It's a burn my
I don't know.
Slade
It's
fan
one of those
card.
titles that actually doesn't actually appear in the song. I think it's Merry Christmas, everybody. I think it is Everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God. We started off well, haven't we?
Instant fail.
Slade fans, don't knock us.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Slade fan club listen to this podcast, so we're probably fairly safe. But for everybody who hasn't heard Merry Christmas, Everyone, stroke Body for the last million years, how do you describe Slade?
I mean, it's a good question because, I mean, Slade are kind of associated with the whole glam rock movement. Obviously, that's not where they came from. Like a lot of bands, that's not where they came from. They started off as a kind of, I think their first album's quite psychedelic when they were still Ambrose Slade. And then they changed their image for an album and had this bother boy skinhead image. I mean, their music, to say that they was such a phenomenally successful singles band. I think they were for a while, the most successful singles band after the Beatles. To say that kind of, they were doing these fantastically catchy, 3-minute pop singles and were, kind of having number one after number one. The actual sound is quite hard. The actual guitar sound is hard. Noddy Holder's voice is obviously, it is the classic, kind of sandpaper, gravelly, raw. It's I listened to the obviously soundtrack album to Flame beforehand, and just sitting through 40 minutes of Noddy Holder shouting at you. By the end of it, I felt quite, I felt like I'd had a bit of an ordeal, however good the songs are, just because his voice is so high in the mix as well. So, I mean, they're not a hard rock band. They kind of turned into a hard rock band, I think, towards the start of the 80s. But they're not really a hard rock band, but at the same time, they do rock quite hard. So yeah, they're a bit of a paradox, really. It's difficult to describe their music other than it's, everybody, like you say, everybody knows Slade or knows the Christmas song, knows what they sound like, but it's, like you think of the other glam rock bands, I suppose it is that same kind of big, kind of chunky riffs with the big drums, but Slade are a bit more traditional. They're coming from a bit more of a traditional songwriting background, the classic Lennon and McCartney thing, which, is picked up in the film as well. That was their kind of ambition to be a similar kind of songwriting partnership. But yeah, sorry, I'm just rambling now. What do you think? How would you describe them?
Well, it's a strange one, isn't it? Because, I'm in my 50s and I remember, I'm too young really to remember seeing them do their hit singles from up to 1975 on Top of the Pops. I was just probably ever so slightly too young. But, they were on, a lot of the songs were omnipresent throughout my upbringing, not just Merry Christmas, but also 'Cause I Love You. That was on adverts. It popped up on TV shows. It was all over the place. But I remember seeing them. But when I first got into music, I had a mate who lived across the road. He was a little bit ahead of me on the music appreciation front, but we used to swap vinyl. And we used to just, sit in our bedrooms in the early to mid 80s, just pouring through our vinyl, pouring through our parents' vinyl, and we would swap things. We would get into things that he wasn't particularly into them, or would like things a little bit more or a little bit less. So I think I'd got the Assassin 12-inch by Marillion. Might have been, was it a present? I don't know, I can't remember. But somehow I ended up with two of them. And I think I swapped that 12-inch single for about 6 or 7 albums because he wanted it so much. And there were a few different albums in there. And I can't remember what the other ones were, but one of them was Slade by Slade. So Slayd by Slade.
Yeah.
The one with that album cover.
Yeah,
Yeah, with Dave Hill with his fucking ridiculous barnet and topless, flexing his bicep. I mean, when you see Dave Hill on stage, it's a preposterous image of Dave Hill. Dave Hill, for everybody listening, was the one with the weird basin cut mullet and giant hats and giant teeth and platforms and everything else. And we ended up just using it as a frisbee in the garden. We took it out of the sleeve and frisbeed it at each other, trying not to hurt our hands when we caught it. And I think we ended up just frisbeeing it down the street, which could have been quite dangerous if it hit someone in the face or something. But, you do these things when you're 11 years old, don't you?
Yeah.
Because Slade, to me, were like a joke band. Didn't take them seriously at all. And I think they really suffered for that. And even by the 1980s or mid to late 80s, when this film Flame is released on VHS, I picked the VHS of this up in a charity shop in Scotland a few years ago, and it doesn't mention the word Slade anywhere on the sleeve.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. The cover, it's Flame, starring in large letters Tom Conti and Alan Lake, and then in tiny letters underneath, featuring Dave Hill, Noddy Holder, Jim Lee, and Don Powell.
Wow.
And then there's a tagline: in the cutthroat world of the music business, you're either a success or dead. And that's back. So the 80s, Slade are so frightfully and horrifically uncool and almost untouchable in terms of promoting a piece of media that their band name is completely absent from the VHS sleeve.
But that is so weird because they had actually made a comeback in the 80s. So kind of like that's kind of really, really odd because they weren't a kind of hit band, but they'd certainly made a decent comeback because they had famously they had this appearance at Reading Festival in 1980 where Ozzy Osbourne dropped out at the last minute, and they were literally the only band available, and it was a legendary appearance, because they were literally down to doing kind of glam rock versions of the Hokey Cokey, Give Us a Goal, which was a football chant song. I mean, they were completely in the dustbin. And then this one appearance, which I think was recorded for the Friday Rock Show and then broadcast, completely turned it around for them. They suddenly were like, fucking hell, this band's great, because they've always were this amazing live band. So I find that kind of strange that in the 80s that they would have done that to them. That's really awful. Yeah, I guess, like you say, though, they had acquired, I mean, as you then get, I mean, later on in the 90s, Reeves and Mortimer, the idea that there's ultimate novelty joke band. Because, they were Brummies, broad accents, which are proudly displayed in this film.
Yeah.
And somehow that was, and obviously with the whole outfits and everybody, the Christmas song is the one thing they know. And so that's the perception of them, I guess. I guess you're right, but I think it's a completely false perception.
I think if Tommy Vance suddenly starts batting for you in the 80s and you get on the Friday Rock Show, that means that 2% of the public suddenly think, oh, actually Slade aren't too bad. The other 98% of the public still think, because Tommy Vance and the Friday Rock Show, with all, the best will in the world, probably didn't make that much of a scratch on the zeitgeist when it came to trying to restore Slade's image. So, they might have had a hit single with Radio Wall of Sound, but I think to the average, and actually when you think about the people who work in PR and who are promoting and doing work for a film company who are releasing a video, they're not going to be tapped into to this kind of thing. All they're going to really know about is Merry Christmas, everybody. Probably.
I guess. But I mean, they had a number 2 single in, was it 1983 with My Oh My? I mean, for a couple of years, they came back really, really strong.
Yeah.
But maybe by the end of the 80s again, don't know.
I'll have to find that VHS tape because
I'm interested by that, really interested.
Yeah, because looking at it, I think it could be late 80s, early 90s when the videotape or video cassette boom is going and you can buy your favourite films and things or your favourite music, concerts in HMV and stuff like that. This doesn't look like a VHS tape that was for the rental market
right
in the early 80s. So I'm glad to dig it out and find the date on it. It's upstairs somewhere. Yeah,
Okay.
but even at that point, whereas years later, I pick up the Flame movie on remastered DVD, I think published by Rhino, which, on the surface of it, it's the remastered album, and it just has the film on DVD in widescreen as an extra,
Oh, right. Okay.
as a second disc, and it is proudly, displaying exactly the same cover art as the novel. I mean, the novel, of course, which we looked at as well by John Pidgeon, the Panther novel. I think there was only ever one run of this, published in 1975 by Panther Books. And when it came to re-release the CD, they went with the same artwork that's on the vinyl, on the album. So all of those doubts are long gone and long in the rearview mirror. But yeah, interesting band with an interesting history. And yeah, but by the late 70s, had gone much harder rock. I think the album, Whatever Happened to Slade, or the one before that, Nobody's Fool, they're definitely taking on a harder edge to try and recapture something, I think,
Well,
because
I don't know, because that was classically, well, that was the one that they had moved to America at that point, and they actually recorded it, I think, in one of the famous studios in New York.
yeah,
My brother had that album. So my sorry, just to go back a tiny bit shortly, my history with Slade is a bit different because my brother, who was quite a bit older than me, and who I got Hawkwind from, was a Slade fanatic. He had all the singles, and when I first started getting into playing music, the things I could do was play my brother's singles. And this is when I was kind of 8 or whatever. So I played all of the Slade singles. So I kind of, they were the first band really that I was kind of really into. But yeah, so he had all the singles and he also had most of the albums. But I remember he had Nobody's Fools, but I don't ever remember him playing it. It doesn't really have any big singles on it. So yeah, so they were trying to, and I think similarly with this film, they had got an idea that they wanted to be a bit more credible beyond just being a glam rock pop band, and that they'd always produced a big noise on stage, and I think they wanted that to be a bit more credible as a rock band. They wanted to break America. It's the classic story of a band who are pretty big in Britain, well, very big in Britain, go to America for a year and a half, come back, and the entire scene has kind of left them behind. They come back in the middle of punk. So yeah, but yeah, I think you're right. They towards the latter half of the 70s, they were wanting to be more of a credible rock band. So yeah, that's probably right. They were moving to the harder rock end of the spectrum.
And it's peculiar, isn't it? Because American listeners of a certain vintage who may not have ever heard of Slade will know "Come On, Feel the Noise" and "Mama,
Yeah.
We're All Crazy Now" because of Quiet Riot, a heavy metal band covering them.
Yeah, that's right.
Which, God bless Jim Lee and Noddy Holder, they'll have made a few quid out of that, I'm sure, which is very nice for them.
I mean, over time, I mean, with all of the re-releases of the Christmas single and everything, I mean, they probably must have made, unless they were on a terrible contract or deal, they must have made quite a bit of money, I would have thought, out of their music at least,
Yeah. Well, I think Noddy and Jim will have done very well out of it, but I think that's probably why Dave Hill and Don Powell have still been touring up until...
Still touring. Yeah, though I'm just doing a bit of research for this, I saw that Don Powell apparently got kind of kicked out in
sacked by email.
Sacked by email, allegedly, because he'd done a tendons in the back of his ankles, and supposedly if he kept drumming he was not going to be able to walk again, and Dave Hill said, right, you got to stop it. And anyway, but Don Hill is apparently still drumming. Don Powell, sorry.
Yeah, my mate Yaki has been going to the Slade Christmas show at a Welly club in Hull for years, and he goes every year and he swears by it. Yeah, he says it's a great show. So, yep, they're still at it. Well, a couple of them some of them are still at it anyway. No idea what Jim Lee's doing.
I think they're both. I mean, Jim Lee always wanted to be more of a songwriter. I don't know if he's still writing songs. There was some rumor that Noddy was going to actually finally produce some kind of solo album, but I don't know when that's going to appear. But in a way, kind of for a band of their vintage, for all four members still to be alive is quite something.
Yeah, I mean, well, as we know from looking at this and looking at Slade around the time, Don Powell was lucky to be alive in 1975, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So how did you come across the film?
Well, I knew about the film because, as I said, my brother had a lot of the singles. So he had Far, Far Away, which I think was the lead single from the soundtrack, and it has that picture of the suits and the Slade. That was on the picture sleeve, and this is unusual even in 1975 to have like picture sleeves. So that one always really stuck out for me, and is a fantastic song. Obviously, the lyrics made no sense to me whatsoever as a 7-year-old. So I think it says on the back of the picture sleeve, that this is from a film. And I think my brother, this is how 70s can you get? I think my brother had the album, but he had it as an 8-track because he had a Capri with an 8-track player.
Fantastic.
And so he needed something to play in his 8-track. So that meant I probably actually didn't hear it as much as some of the other stuff. But yeah, so I was aware of it. It was a film, from probably a few years after it had actually come out. But
yeah.
I can't remember the first time I saw it. I'm guessing it must have been on telly. Was it on Videodrome or Moviedrome at some point?
I don't know. I had no idea it even existed till about 10 years ago. And I was in the pub with my mate John, probably in Chesterfield or somewhere like that. And he mentioned it. I was like, eh? And he said, oh, yes, it's brilliant. Oh, yeah, you got to watch Flare. It's absolutely fantastic. It's one of the greatest films ever made. And the soundtrack's absolutely amazing. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? So this is why I ended up going on Amazon while we were in the pub, I think. Probably this is how I roll. I'll have a skinful and someone will say something's good, and the next thing is I'm online buying the fucking
next
thing.
time you bought it,
yeah, and sometimes you get home and a few days later something arrives, you open it and think, what the fuck is this? But on this occasion, I ordered it and I put it on, and of course the piano opening of How Does It Feel? I was confused. I was like, what on earth am I listening to? And Phil, my other half, she fucking loves it. And she was from a similar position as me, Slade, Merry Christmas, everything else. Absolutely adores that album, listens to it all the time, off her own bat. I'll be upstairs and I'll hear How Does It Feel come on in the kitchen because she absolutely adores it. And we watched the film and I was sort of in shock at what I'd just watched because it was so incongruous seeing that band that I'd seen on Top of the Pops and all those classic performances doing what is essentially a gritty, I was about to say northern town story, but it's because it's set in the Midlands, even though half of it is filmed in Sheffield.
But bear in mind, anybody in London, I mean, anything above London is the north.
Very true.
And as you say, half of it is shot in Sheffield, so I think it probably does count as a.
I think it's fair. And it very much occupies. There's a real sweet spot of films for me from the 70s where they're shot and capture a part of Britain that would not exist only a couple of years later. So all the scenes that are shot in Sheffield, some of which are quite sad, of all the terrace 2 up, 2 downs, the back-to-backs, most of which are already boarded up and the tractors are going down the street ready to demolish them. I absolutely, I don't know why, but I absolutely love that stuff because it might as well be a black and white film about the 1920s for all that any of it still exists for you to actually see. It captures a really unique moment in time where Britain was changing so much. And there are a few other films which come close to it as well, like Little Malcolm and his battle against the eunuchs, the John Hurt film, which is similarly, I think a lot of that is shot in Sheffield in places that were probably demolished only a couple of years later. And it really kind of speaks to me as well because when I was a kid, my nana and granddad lived in a very, very similar front to back, 2 up, 2 down terrace that I fucking hated because it had an outside toilet that was full of massive spiders. They had a tin bath, all that business, really, really crazy to think about it. And there were people in that neighbourhood who held out and refused to answer the door to anybody they didn't know. And there's that scene is in this film, isn't it? Where Noddy's, or Stoker, the Noddy Holder character, his mum speaks to Devlin through the letterbox, thinks he's from the council, and refuses to let him in because she's refusing to leave the house so it can be demolished.
When I was listening to that scene, by the way, I was watching the scene today, and it suddenly occurred to me that because it's meant to be his grandmother, and I'm absolutely sure that's Noddy Holder. doing it, putting on the voice.
Really?
Watch that scene again. That's Noddy Holder doing it. I'm absolutely convinced. Yeah,
I'm going to rewatch. I'll wait for the Blu-ray. I'll wait for the Blu-ray for higher definition. Because, of course, the other thing we should say is
I'll bet money on that.
BFI are releasing a Blu-ray of this in a
Absolutely.
few weeks.
So yeah, that was kind of part of the prompt, I guess, for us to talk about this finally, because we've been talking about doing it for a while. And I think it's going to get released in the cinema, so in a cinematic release as well.
I'm going to try very hard to find one. I think there's one in Bradford that often shows these one-offs. I'm going to try and get to it. It's always been really hard to find much information about the background to this film beyond the odd interview here and there as well. There was one on the DVD release with Noddy that's terrible quality and looks like it was filmed on the Crossroads set on a handheld fucking VHS camcorder. And I think it's being interviewed by Gary Crowley, by a very young Gary Crowley. Yeah. But it's really terrible. Right, but there's a bit more information easily available these days. But fortunately now, Darrell Easley recently released this book, Whatever Happened to Slade.
Yes.
So
which I haven't read, but I would like to read.
It's great. And not only that, after years of not really knowing anything about this film, there's 3 whole chapters on it, which is absolutely terrific. But even then, it leaves so many answers. I'm sorry, it's so many questions unanswered.
Unanswered, yeah.
There's a book as well by Chris Selby celebrating the 50th anniversary of the film, but it hasn't arrived. I ordered it quite a while ago. The fuck around.
Yeah, I spotted that online, yeah.
It'll probably arrive tomorrow. Guarantee it will arrive tomorrow morning. But anyway, I got Whatever Happens to Slade, and it's a really, really great book, and it fills in some of the background details about this. Because, of course, Slade, back in the day, they're managed by Chaz Chandler, Animals bassist who famously managed Jimi Hendrix. He was the guy who convinced them to adopt a skinhead kind of image for that one album, but then of course they went into the glam image, became as you said, a hugely successful singles band with #1 albums as well. So he goes into an agreement with Sandy Lieberson, who's just produced 2 David Essex films. That'll Be the Day and another one. Stardust, yeah, the one that wasn't Silver Dream Racer.
Yeah, that's right, even though it sounds like it could be.
Yeah, I mean, it might have done Silver Dream Racer as well. I have no idea. I don't think I've ever seen any of those David Essex films, but I did watch Silver Dream Racer as a kid because our babysitter insisted, and she cried for about an hour after it finished. So I have traumatic memories of staring at my babysitter crying her eyes out.
So I haven't seen that one, but I have seen That'll Be the Day and Stardust. That'll Be the Day is fantastic. If you like this, you must watch That'll Be the Day. And Stardust is also interesting. Definitely worth a watch. Really good.
Yeah. Well, the other fascinating thing is Sandy Lieberson also produced Performance. Holy shit! So you've got this incredible kind of picture starting to emerge of this wonderful stew of people that get involved in this.
Absolutely, but of course Sandy Lieberson also produced, as part of Good Times, the final programme.
Oh, bloody hell. Entirely missed that.
There's the Moorcock connection for the entire podcast.
Entirely missed that. So, well, bloody hell. So there's even a Moorcock Jerry Cornelius connection.
Yeah, totally.
So Lieberson teams up with legendary British director and producer David Putnam and creates Good Time Enterprises. And they allocate the film to producer Gavrik Losey, son of Joseph Losey, the American director who came to the UK after being blacklisted by Hollywood in the 1950s for being a card-carrying communist, and later directed The Servant with Dirk Bogarde. Fucking hell. So many wildly talented people surrounding the making of this film. But you actually found a really interesting article about Good Time Enterprises as well, and scanned it and sent me them.
That's right. So I think it's still the current issue of Shindig. They've got a Thomas Patterson does a great article about Good Times and exactly. And so covers kind of some of the stuff that you've already talked about. But of course, they then went on after Flame to have their biggest success, which was Bugsy Malone.
Incredible. So when you consider how the early concepts for this Slade film were proposed as a silly romp and a spoof on the Quatermass serials, called The Quite a Mess Experiment.
That title alone, every time I say it, The Quite a Mess Experiment, just makes me laugh so much. It's such a stupid yet brilliant title that I almost would have wanted to see that film.
I can't believe it never turned up on the Kenny Everett video show or something. A Professor Quite a Mess character.
Exactly, yeah.
So Noddy Holder's Professor Quite a Mess and his team of Jim Lee as Mark Bender and Don Powell as Jeff Munter, or whatever it was, I can't remember, would try to defeat a toxic monster played by Dave Hill, only to realise he was a great draw as a rock star instead. And that would have been the plot of the Slade movie. So it starts out like that. And as it happens, what actually comes out of it is as diametrically opposed to that concept as you can possibly get.
Yeah.
It's incredible, really. So to direct the tap, Richard Longcrane, incredibly posh, public school boy who'd been working for the Beeb. This was his first feature at 28. Before this, he'd directed episodes of Tomorrow's World for the BBC. For anybody outside the UK or under a certain age, Tomorrow's World was like compulsive viewing for anybody even slightly interested in what the future might hold, or anybody who fancied Judith Hahn, either of those things. And the most amazing factoid about Longcrane is he worked on toys and props and was one of the team responsible for creating everybody's favourite 70s and 80s executive desktop toy, Newton's Cradle.
Yeah.
It's like, what? This is so fucking weird. Oh, it's so weird. And after this, he did a Mia Farrow horror film, which I've never seen, called Full Circle.
No, I haven't either.
Based on a Peter Stroud novel with a screenplay by Harry Bromley Davenport, who would go on to write and direct Extra, the low-budget British horror film beloved of many of my age because an action man comes to life and grows to 6 feet tall and bayonets Lou Beale out of EastEnders.
I don't think I've ever made it past the first 15 minutes of that film. I obviously
you missed the best bit.
Must do better.
If you get put off by the woman giving birth to a full-grown man in a particularly gruesome, icky scene, you've got to stick with it for Lou Beale out of EastEnders chopping a small child's snake up and then, by revenge, being brutally bayoneted by a 6-foot-tall action man that kicks her door down. Or does it blow a door down? One or the other. Anyway, yeah, you got to watch Extra. And then, I've never seen it, but he also directed The Missionary, Brimstone and Treacle, and Richard III, the Ian McKellen Richard III film, which I fucking love. I absolutely love that film. But I would say that film doesn't have a straight similarity with Flame in terms of content, but it has a slight similarity with Flame in that whenever I watch Richard III, and I watch it once a year, I always think, I fucking love this film, but it always feels like there's stuff missing.
Right.
And that's what Slade in Flame feels like. More so, now I've read the book.
Of course. Now you know. Yes.
Yeah. But we'll get to the book. So we've got our core team together. But to write the film, Putnam taps Andrew Birkin, sister of Jane Birkin, who at the time had spent a year working with Albert Speer, the German architect who was also Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production in Nazi Germany during most of World War II and was convicted at the Nuremberg trials and got 20 years in clink. Birkin was working with Speer to adapt his book Inside the Third Reich. But because it wasn't making progress, Putnam suggested he pick up the Slade script. What? It just gets weirder and weirder. It's like, fucking hell, this is as far from Professor Quite a Mess as you're ever going to get, isn't it? What an incredible fucking ensemble of people to end up making a film with Slade, who were, in effect, probably 1975's The Spice Girls in terms of pop chart success. You know? I suppose the difference, Spice Girls were, a manufactured band. Slade wrote and performed their own music, so not entirely the same. But in terms of colour, image, pop chart success, and all that business, I mean, blimey. I think I messaged you in a message last week. We should like do a pitch for an alternate Spice World movie that followed the same path as this. But yeah, I never got round to it. Probably a good thing.
No,
Probably a good
no.
thing. So Birkin and Longcrane go on tour with Slade for a few weeks in the USA and get exposed to the seedy side of the business, and that fed the script that ended up as Flame. And that's where we end up with this movie, which is not surprising then when we think about the tone and mood of Flame that's established fairly quickly as the film kicks off. There are a couple of amusing moments, and there are some comedy beats in the first, probably third of the film, but they don't last too long. There's the occasional fun line that sometimes gets lost in the sound mix. I think there's one brilliant bit where Noddy Holder and Dave Hill or Jim Lee are arguing again, going back to leaving the concert hall to go back to the hotel, and Don Powell puts one of his cracks in and says, "Well, I think you're both pretty," and Noddy goes, "Get back and go, goalie." but it's almost lost in the sound mix. Some really lovely moments.
Don Powell does have some very, very good lines in this film. I mean, we might be getting onto it, but the bit in the train where he asks where the toilet is, and then gets up, he asks very politely the lady in front of him, and she's clearly thinking, "Oh, well, at least this wild-haired young man asked nicely," and then he gets up and says, "Right, lads, I'm off for a piss." His delivery is very good. He's got actual natural comic delivery. Is excellent. I think though that you're right that they actually got somebody else to add some comedic dialogue into it because Birkin's original was so bleak. They thought, God, we've got to put some jokes in here. I think was it Dave Humphreys? Another guy. Yeah, if you look on the actual credit, he does an additional dialogue. So he was brought in to make it not quite so bleak.
Apparently he was brought in to bring some Midlands attitude because Birkin was a public school boy as well, and his script he couldn't reproduce the patois, so to speak. Right. So Humphreys came in, and I'm sure Humphreys brought some of that sense of humour with it as well. Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating thing because not only have you got the band, and we'll talk about the performance of the band as actors, especially Don Powell, who I think absolutely gets the best scenes in the film. The best scene in the film is the canal scene for me. Yeah. Where he's with his old gaffer, sat by the canal, and there's a fucking brilliant line that he gets. But the film kicks off with like two settings which it juxtaposes back to back. You've got a wedding where we meet the band and its frontman Jack Daniels, played by the late Alan Lake, who Alan Lake never half-arsed anything, did he? He was brilliant, and
he is absolutely brilliant in this film.
Yeah, legendarily, he went out on the piss with some of the crew in the afternoon, came back arseholed, and they were all arseholed as well. So he was almost fired from the film, but depending on which story you hear, either Diana Dawes went to the producer and said he will not drink again for the rest of this film, and he didn't. But it gives it all. We talked a few episodes ago, several episodes ago, about some Doctor Who, and I watched a Tom Baker Doctor Who story called Underworld, and Alan Lake's in that. He's on a set. They're filming it all with no sets, using chroma key with shitty special effects. He's got a stupid costume on, and he still gives it absolutely everything. But you've got this wedding, and the band have a scrap. Dave Hill and Jim Lee are in his band. There's a quick fight, and there's a hard cut to Don Powell leaving his job at the Steelworks. And cue the opening titles. How Does It Feel comes in as Don goes on to his high-rise flat that he lives in with his mum and dad. And it's just such a fucking terrific opening. And this is the opening that I watched, and I was like, what the fuck am I watching? Why have I never seen this film before? I love films like this.
Yeah.
Why have I never seen this film? It's just, it's incredible. But what an opening, and how confused must young Slade fans have been in the cinema?
Well, yeah, exactly, because kind of almost like, you're just to see them acting or not being Slade. It's like, the first thing you see, like you say, is Alan Lake. It's like, well, or Jack Daniels, who's this guy? Why? Yeah, exactly. The fact that it's setting them up as being in a drama rather than it's not like going to be a Hard Day's Night or whatever.
Yeah,
I mean that in itself is kind of confusing, but as you say, so brilliant. That scene in the steelworks and then kind of walking. And he gets a lift and a sidecar, and then that massive high rise.
Yeah.
It's almost like bingo card, grim 70s. It's like if you live in the Midlands, obviously you work in a steelworks, and obviously if you're not living in a boarded up terrace, you go into this brutalist high rise. Instead, which is very. I tell you what, actually, just thinking about it, the bit where he walks in and his parents are having this kind of meal, and it's just like that bit in Clockwork Orange. I think it's exactly the same. It just made me think of that.
Yeah. There's that really sweet little bit as well where his dad's sitting there in a neck brace. We don't know why his dad's in a neck brace, but he's sitting there at the little Formica 2 or 3 person dinner table, and his mum's in her house coat and she's telling him off for something, and Don says something to the budgie and winks at his dad, and his dad just has this little smile come across his face. But it's like he can't laugh openly, otherwise he'll get told off as well. It's such a beautiful little scene. But Don's playing Charlie. We're going to fuck up with the names all the way through, but Don is playing Charlie. I think we'll probably just end up referring to them by the Slade names.
By the Slade names, yeah.
He goes to audition with the band with Jack Daniels and co. Jack Daniels and the DTs, and gets the gig because he's got a kit. And Jack tries to introduce him to the manager, Harding, who we'll get back to. And they head to a gig on to find they're on the same bill as Roy Priest and the Undertakers, which absolutely fascinates me, this, because this film is supposed to be set in 1968. There are many, many indications that they didn't really try too hard to make extras look like they were in 1968. It's only 7 years between the date this film comes out and 1968. But the people who are dancing at shows and everything else are so obviously 1970s, mid-70s people. They're wearing flares, they've got enormous hair, kite collars, the works.
But that's the thing that confused me, because the book, it's not completely explicit in the book, but as you say, it's clearly meant to be in the late 60s.
Yeah.
Whereas the film just doesn't make any kind. If you're watching that film, you're thinking it's set, if not in the present day, then a couple of years beforehand. In the early 70s.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the only indication in the film, I think there's one scene where there's some news on the TV that refers to something from 1968 or something. Not the Suez Crisis.
No, it's not the Suez Crisis. You're right. Yeah. I was thinking that.
Yeah, there's something.
I can't remember what it is though.
Yeah, but they're on the bill as Roy Priest of the Undertakers, who were kind of set up as like the rival band, the villains of the piece, and they're fronted by Noddy Holder, and they play a practical joke that has some ramifications. But the song, This Girl, and this is one of the things why I would struggle to place this in the 60s. In the film, the song sounds pretty ropey, but when you listen to it on the album, properly produced with all the brass section and everything else, it is a remarkably bang-up attempt at creating an early to mid-70s Alice Cooper number.
Yeah.
To go along with the cheap pub-level vaudevillian stage show of Roy Priest and the Undertakers. But it's so faithful in its reproduction of that era of Cooper, it even has the brass section. And if you replaced Noddy's vocals with an Alice Cooper vocal, it would be right at home on any number of 70s Alice Cooper albums. It's amazing, really. And I've no idea what was in Jim and Noddy's head when they created that song to go along with Roy Priest and the Undertakers. But I could only think they were trying to set up the Undertakers as some kind of Alice Cooper style band, and did a fucking great job of reproducing that style of music.
Yeah. I guess kind of like the obvious comparison is meant to be like Lord Such in terms of the actual image, and look, and maybe a little bit of Arthur Brown thrown in as well, but actually, as they do the song, it's got the horror keyboards on it, and it's a great little bit actually when they do that song. Marvelous.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I also love the chase, where the chase, because they play this trick, Noddy's vocalist starts his song from inside a coffin, and can't get out because he's been locked in. But the Undertakers chase Jack and the DTs in a hearse that looks like something out of what was that bloody cartoon? I can't remember.
Like the Wacky Races.
Wacky Races, yeah. So that part of the film feels a little bit like a Barmy Caper, even to the point where Jack Daniels crashes. It even has a few gags at the crash where Don says, great bit of parking that, or whatever he says. Whenever you see Don, he almost nods at something and spouts a one-liner and then moves on. And I think that was about as much as they could do with him most of the time, because Richard Longcrane says in an interview for Whatever Happened to Slade, the book, he says that every single day he had to tell Don exactly what he was doing and sometimes tell him who he was.
Yeah.
Because his traumatic brain injury basically rendered him every morning he woke up and he didn't know what the fuck was going on.
So this was the thing, of course, which I instantly thought, here you've got this scene in the film, a big car crash. This is a guy who's been like a year or a bit before in a car crash, which has killed his fiancée and, as you say, kind of given him permanent brain damage, basically.
Yeah.
So it was a bit like, I mean, not that it was insensitive, but it was a bit peculiar at the same, to then be involved in that in the film.
Yeah. And then we move into some toilet motif, which is repeated semi-regularly throughout the film, because they have a night in the cells and Jack and Don Powell are eating beans from plates next to a cell toilet. And you get a shot of a copper walking down past all of the holding cells. And it must be a morning routine. They're not allowed to flush their own toilet. He walks past, and each time he walks past a door, he flushes the toilet in the cell. So cut to Don and Jack Daniels. Jack Daniels sat a foot from this bog, eating beans, and the toilet flushes next to him. It's incredible. And then the following scene, almost, is Jim and Noddy talking about Noddy leaving the music business over a piss in the urinal, with the camera taking an Armitage Shanks point of view. Hard Day's Night, this is not. It really isn't.
Yeah.
It really isn't. This is a point where, when I was watching the film again after reading the book, I was thinking, fucking hell, this is going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Because you don't really get in the film a really good sense of the band parting ways with Jack.
No.
And then Noddy joining the band. It's just they have that talk at the urinal, and then the next thing they're off to a gig. You get a little bit more background detail of what's going on
Jack
in the book.
is much more of a character in the book, and you actually get a lot more of his thoughts as well.
Yeah.
And there is much more, like you said earlier about, this is a film in a way about change with the environment, but it's also about Jack very much represents the old rock and roll world and still thinks that this is the way to do it. Whereas, of course, kind of, the band that becomes Flame represents the next generation. And that is a kind of motif throughout the book.
Yeah. In the book, Jack really is the only character who's afforded any kind of narrative point of view. Nobody else is. None of the other characters really get that rich a POV narrative. And that's why I'm really pleased that Jack does get those repeat returns in the book, and he actually gets the coda of sorts at the end, which I think was lovely. I think it's a shame, because I think Alan Lake did a really bang-up job playing the Jack Daniels character, and I would have quite happily seen more of him. But, yeah. There's some nice street scenes as well, where we see Jim and his missus as the new band head off in the mate Russell's van. And again, it's wonderfully bleak in one way, because you got their enthusiasm and camaraderie as they get in the van and they leave Jim and his wife's house, and it's all really nice red painted sills and doors, and it looks really, really well maintained. And then as soon as they get in the van and head off down the rest of the street, all of the rest of the street is boarded up. And you can see workmen further down working, getting ready for demolition.
Yeah.
It's really sad. And they play the first gig with their Monkeys Can't Swing, which is probably the most energetic song on the soundtrack.
Great song.
Energetic Slade. Sadly, Jack has to watch along with the manager Harding, and it's striking, even though this is a filmed and staged scene, watching Slade play a rock and roll song in regular-ish clothes. And you do get the sense that when this was filmed, they were actually playing. They're really something to watch.
They are the definition of a tight, exciting kind of rock and roll band. And you're right. Yeah, outside of the kind of glam costumes that people would have been used to seeing them at the time, it puts them in I think Dave Hill's still got quite an interesting shirt on, but it puts them in a slightly different context. I just want to say as well that scene, or certainly when you see Harding going to the club, that's the Sherwood Rooms in Nottingham, which was the first venue I should have seen Hawkwind in, but I was in the queue with my mate and he bottled it and he said, I don't want to go, and so anyway, so I just want to say that, because the Sherwood Rooms always holds a particular place in my heart as a result. But yeah, so that's one of the bits that's filmed in Nottingham anyway.
What a missed opportunity.
Yeah,
what
I know.
shame.
I know. I would have seen Nick Turner with them and everything, but anyway.
Oh, well, you saw him eventually, I'm sure.
Yeah, the next year at Rock City, yeah. The other thing as well, actually, I think to mention, and in the book, again, this is made a bit more explicit, that the band that they have become after they've got rid of Jack Daniels, they're called Iron Rod, which is this marvellous kind of 70s pseudo metal kind of name. And you see it on the bass drum. It's written on the bass drum, but I don't think it's ever referred to in the film that they're called Iron Rod.
No, I don't think it is. And it's funny that, isn't it, that they end up with this very metal name, because if you think about bands coming together in the industrial heartlands of the Midlands, you tend to think about metal, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
You tend to think about Sabbath and Judas Priest, you know? So, yeah, maybe a few years later, they would have emerged as a metal act if they hadn't started in the 60s. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
But there's some nice interplay between the band here as well. But we also get a proper intro to the manager, Harding, here. And he's a nasty fucker. Ron Harding, which I think is generally agreed to be some kind of thinly veiled take on Don Arden.
Don Arden, yeah.
So Don Arden, I think himself he was Black Sabbath's manager in the 70s and was a bit of a hard ass and something of is it fair to say he was something of a gangster in his approach?
Oh, I mean, he was the guy who famously held the who's the main guy in the Small Faces? Anyway, held him out the window.
Steve Marriott,
yeah, by his ankles, because he was managing them at the time, and yeah, exactly. It was that management by intimidation. I mean, very much like Peter Grant with Led Zeppelin, but I think that Arden definitely had, or certainly rumoured to have, kind of proper criminal connections, because it was a I mean, as the film tries to portray, I mean, it's a pretty seedy profession. I mean, that's why it's so interesting when you get the contrast when Tom Conti comes in, which is a complete contrast to actually how, the music industry at that level worked. It really is kind of pretty grim. I just want to say as well that the bit where Harding and Noddy have a confrontation and Johnny Shannon, who's playing Harding, pulls Noddy's hair, that looks really painful. That looks like it really does look like he's giving him a hell of a tug there.
Yeah, I don't think Johnny Shannon really did anything by halves, did he? and apparently they did many takes of that as well.
Oh God, really?
Yeah. Oh, and so of course Johnny Shannon, aka Harry Flowers from Performance, just brilliant casting. If you want somebody who effortlessly, before he even opens his mouth, looks like a hard case and someone not to mess with. And also, there is a Minnie Moorcock connection with Johnny Shannon, albeit involving some degrees of separation. He was also in The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, which Moorcock ended up novelising.
Yeah.
And basically turned into a Jerry Cornelius story.
Yeah.
Which I hadn't read it for like 30 years. I need to read that again at some point. But yeah, so no matter how... And I don't think any of them are weak. I think all of the band do a bang-up job with what they're there to do. Jim Lee needs to be slightly surly and quiet, and he does that absolutely fine. The quiet scene him and Noddy have in the pigeon coop, I think they have two scenes together with nobody else around. One's when they're having a piss, and one's in the pigeon coop. And I think they're both absolutely fine scenes. I think Noddy is fine. Noddy is Noddy. I think he wisecracks and he argues with people and he sings on stage. I think it's fine. Dave Hill's maybe the weak link.
Maybe.
But even then, what's Dave's arc in the film? Is to go from being a goof to being an arsehole.
yeah, he gets to arsehole quite quickly, actually.
Yeah, he does, yeah.
I just want to say about that coop scene, I was thinking they're very good at making the dialogue quite naturalistic. I mean, it does actually feel like a chat between two guys, two friends. Yeah. I mean, it comes off really well. And also, that's not in the book. Noddy isn't a pigeon fancier in the book. And
that's right, it's not in the book at all. Neither is his job at the market.
It feels again like, how northern can we make this guy? I mean, he only needed to give him a whippet as well. So he's a pigeon fancier. But it's a great little scene, that, like you say, I love the interaction between the two of them in that.
Yeah. For me, I think Don Powell is the one that I can't tear my eyes off whenever I watch it. He's so strangely innocent, yet intense presence. It's very odd. It's very odd. I've talked about that scene where, because you get these scenes, and then you get the scene in the boarded up streets where Devlin, played by Ken Colley, of course, better known to everybody as Admiral Piet from from the Star Wars movies.
Yeah.
Nod his nan were up on the door. It's really vivid and sad, and that leads into that lovely scene in the pigeon loft. It really, really grounds it, but then we do get introduced to the other half of the managerial equation, which is Tom Conti as Seymour, the one who wants to take them on as a project. And the culture clash angle gets set, not just between them and the band, as we see them rubbing up against the money and the very posh managerial style of Seymour and his trust fund approach, but also there's that scene where the band go to his house, and Angie, who I think at that point is Barry's girlfriend, but later becomes Noddy's girlfriend, asks for a rum and black, and there's just a look of absolute puzzlement on Tom Conti's face.
Exactly, and his wife has to lead her away.
That's right.
Where they can talk about something more ladylike.
It's so nonplussed at this request and don't get it. He just says to his wife, "Introduce us to some people so I don't have to deal with this." It's brilliant, but it's a real shame at this point. I mean, we'll talk about the book, but watching the film after reading the book, it got such a pace. You don't really get the sense of how Jack Daniels exited the scene, or even how they properly break with Harding. And I think that I don't know if I've got mixed feelings on that, because I think the book and the film handle it slightly differently. In the book, Harding says verbally to them, "You're gone, you're out, I don't want you anymore." That never happens in the film. So in the film, you get the sense that they are still, he pulls Noddy's hair, calls them a set of useless twats, but it's you don't get as hard a break.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he does actually deliver the line, though, saying, "That's it, you've just lost kind of 6 weeks of gigs. I'm not your agent anymore." I think you do actually get that. But the thing that you really kind of miss from the book is, so it cuts to Tom Conti, but you don't get the sense. I mean, again, it's kind of, it's nodded at, but you don't get the sense of how much this is some kind of novelty project for him, and how he wants to prove that the power of marketing, you can sell fish fingers, you can sell a band in the same way, and that he's trying to kind of prove some kind of point. Because in the film it's a bit like, oh, let's take this band on, because Devlin's been kind of, in the book, Devlin has this whole kind of tour around the seedy clubs and dives of the Midlands trying to find a suitable band. And in the film, there's even a little line where it suggests that Slade aren't the first, or Flame aren't the first band that they've tried to entice in this way. But Flame happen to be the ones who take the bait. So that comes out a bit more in the book as to why he's doing what he's doing.
You still get a good sense in the film that he's just some posh kid using his trust fund to try, because there's that scene with his mentor, whoever, is it a family member, the old guy in the garden? I can't remember.
I think in the book it's somebody who has some kind of control over the trust fund or something like that. But
someone who Seymour is intimidated by. Yeah. So you do get the sense he's got this trust fund behind him, and he's trying to make his way by making something of his own, by using the power of slickness and PR to do a job. And you do get more sense of that in the book. I think there's a lot more evidence of what's behind it, but in a way, I think because it's so scant in the film, I think that just makes the conflict between his approach and Harding's approach more stark. Because they're both exploitative, ruthless. It's just he misjudges just how greedy Harding is, because the difference between them isn't just tailoring. It's that he doesn't have to be greedy, whereas Harding does, and that pushes Harding several stages further.
But it's also not having, you get the sense he's never come into contact properly with Harding's world before, and he can't imagine what Harding might do to get his share or to get his property back. And I guess, sorry, just to go back to the marketing thing, I think it is in the book. It's an explicit theme that if you package something in the right way, regardless in a way of the music, I think it actually says in the book, you can make a success of a group, and that's a much stronger theme in the book. It's much more cynical rather than in the film. Sometimes it's a bit like these guys have decided to kind of take Flame on because they think that they can manage them better than somebody like Harding, whereas it's thematically it's much more about this idea that image is everything in the book.
It's quite prophetic as well, isn't it, as to what ends up happening with the music business. I mean, there was another film came out, I can't remember, I think it was probably turn of the 70s, a Pete Walker film, and it's going to annoy me because I'll never remember the name of it, but it's about a manufactured pop star, and it's like a semi-dystopian view of a slightly futuristic Britain.
It's Privilege.
And there was, and it's a pop star who starred in it.
Is Paul Jones?
Yes, yeah, which is a really fascinating film.
It's a great film.
Yeah. That's if anybody's interested, for a great companion to this from the perspective of that theme, Privilege, the BFI Blu-ray is fantastic, and it's well worth a look. And now I'm going to go and dig it out and watch it over the next couple of days because I haven't watched it for years. But I remember watching it at the time and thinking, fucking hell, this film is really incredibly interesting for what it's actually predicting.
Well, it's the idea of you can control the youth by having them focus on this kind of one pop star, this figure. If you control the pop star, you can control the youth.
Yeah, and control the message and everything. It's almost like, it's basically the same concept as Rollerball, isn't it? But, exactly. It's Rollerball with no violence, no budget.
Yeah. It's the diversion of kind of, the people's instincts. They're all of those kind of aggressive instincts are concentrated on the game. And, in Privilege, all of the, that kind of hysteria, the fandemonium that you see in Flame as well, is all concentrated on this figure, and then it of course makes them the masses, or certainly the young generation, easier to control if you can control the message of the pop star.
Have we just thought of the perfect triple bill of movies?
I'd love to see Privilege again. Actually, I saw it at the NFT years ago. But I'd love to see that again. I think it's got
Rollerball,
Gene Shrimpton in as well.
Yeah, Rollerball, Flame, and Privilege. Yeah, what a triple bill.
Always up for seeing Rollerball.
I fucking love Rollerball. I managed to track down the vinyl soundtrack a couple of years ago, just because I just had to have the Executive Party music.
Yeah. That is the one record I stole off my brother, because my brother, and this is all around the same time, of course. This is also Rollerball's also 75, and I remember him.
Fucking hell! What a year!
Yeah, coming back from having seen it and saying, "Oh my god, this amazing film!" And I'd only be about 7 or 8, but he got the soundtrack, and obviously a lot of it is classical, but it's got the Andre Previn goes Cosmic Disco track, and it's great.
Yeah. Oh my god,
film's great. But anyway, we're not talking about that, I guess. But it is a great film.
But you know what? If we end up doing more film podcasts, Rollerball is probably going to be in the mix somewhere. Absolutely. Rollerball, Zardoz. I think we even mentioned Zardoz at one point.
Zardoz. Yeah, don't get me started on Zardoz. I saw that again a couple of years. Well, actually last year, because they did the reissue of it. Oh, amazing film.
I picked up the John Bowman novelization as well, and it's substantially different.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be interested to read that, actually, yeah.
Weirdly, it's sort of much more sci-fi.
Okay.
Something to think about in the future. Yeah.
Okay.
But when we talk about the difference between the John Pidgeon novelization of this and the film, it's even more evident with the next scene, where the band do a promotional trip to a pirate station aboard an old sea fort occupied by Tommy Vance.
Tommy Vance's moustache is what's occupying it. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, but I was blown away. You actually messaged me and said
the scene in the book is brilliant. This scene, and it gives all so much more background, because in the film you're not entirely sure what's happening. It's like, why on earth is somebody shooting at the radio station?
Yeah,
and the conclusion you come to is that it's just another publicity stunt. But in the book, It's actually seems to be like a real thing. There's this real competition between these radio pirates to gain control of this fort.
Yeah.
And it just so happens that Seymour and his associates get some kind of inside knowledge that there's going to be this attack, or it's likely to be, and they kind of send Flame there anyway. Do you want to talk about Billy Shakespeare?
That is exactly. I was going to read it.
Yeah, do.
I was going to read this bit because, you actually get a couple of pages explaining the entire background and context of this pirate radio station, why it's where it is, what the sea fort is, and why it is at odds with some other people. Why it is, why it's high stakes, and why the army are occupying and blowing up sea forts to deny them falling into the hands of these pirate radio stations. It says there were attacks on the fort by persons unknown. The first attack was more accurately an attempted occupation. 4 men and 2 women arrived apparently unarmed, in hired fishing boat, but were discouraged from their project by threats of violence and an energetic display of iron bars. 2 off-duty disc jockeys urinated between the railings that surrounded the platform, although gusting winds lessened the accuracy of their aim. Sorry, the brown ale is starting to gum my mouth shut, I think. So I'm now drinking Higson's Brewery brown ale, which I've never heard of, but Phil picked me up. Yeah, it's all right.
So you've got a ready supply in front of you. Okay.
Yeah, if I get this one drunk, I'm on to Newcastle Brown because I've run out of non-Newcastle Brown. But Newcastle Brown, not real beer. Anyway. So the second, a genuine attack, was led by a 21-stone ex-professional wrestler called Billy Shakespeare, who liked to quote his namesake between rounds and had claimed in his prime to be able to break a man's leg across his own thigh. With him were 5 dancehall bouncers, 3 of whom had convictions for grievous bodily harm. The occupants of the fort, elated by the first visit, took no chances with the wrestler's reputation. As his boat approached, they lobbed heavy chunks of metal from 60 feet up. Through a megaphone, Shakespeare said, "If you want trouble, you're looking at it." He then began to fire at the platform with an air pistol and gestured at the vessel's frightened pilot to approach a ladder bolted to one of the fort's stout legs. Ignoring missiles and brandishing his pistol, he leapt with remarkable ability for a bulky man onto the ladder's lowest rung, but a sudden swell took the boat away before any of his men could follow. Alone, he began the long ascent. When he was halfway up, the fort's defenders commenced to drop crude petrol bombs from above to halt his climb and to dissuade others from following. One bomb burst against a rung 10 feet above Shakespeare's head, and a large, ragged blob of flaming fuel swamped his head and shoulders. An alumnus of Yule Brynner, he had no hair to singe, but the sleeve which protected his naked scalp began to burn, along with areas on his back and shoulders. With a cry that in happier times must have paralysed opponents with fear in the ring, he hurled himself, a flailing, flambéed great hot potato, backwards into the sea, missing the transom of the pitching boat beneath by some few feet. It took 3 men to haul the monstrous hulk aboard. Billy Shakespeare lay across the cabin roof like a grounded walrus and waved impatiently for his megaphone. Then, wrenching his neck as he strained to catch sight of his assailants, he shook his free hand in a fist and bellowed with simple finality, "I'll be back." Although hardly a gentleman, Billy kept his word. It was ironic that the date of his return should coincide with the day the Postmaster General announced in the House of Commons that the Marine Broadcasting Offences Act would come into operation a month later, precisely on August 15th, and anyone who involved himself with the illegal stations thereafter would be committing a criminal offence. By another coincidence, the return bout took place only half an hour after the arrival at Radio Phoenix of the pop group Flame, making a personal appearance on Gary Pearce's 3 o'clock trip to publicise their first single, So Far So Good, before it became illegal to do so. I can understand why this isn't in the film, because it would have been really, really difficult to film.
Yeah. And
but what a fucking shame.
I know. That line, an alumnus of Yule Brynner, because I think John Pidgeon went on later to do comedy writing, and there are certain lines in the book where you think that is really funny. Yeah, he's got a nice turn of phrase.
Yeah, so John Pidgeon, when he was producing radio for BBC Two, he was behind stuff like The Mighty Boosh. What else did he do? I looked this up the other day. He did The Mighty Boosh, Dead Ringers, Flight of the Conchords, and
Flight
Little
of the Conchords. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was heavily involved in that kind of stuff. Sadly passed away in 2016, John Pidgeon, but his website is still live with all of his bits and pieces. So well worth a look. So lots of blogs
Yeah.
and other bits and pieces. So somebody is continuing to pay to keep his website active.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's really nice. There's a lot
He's
of
an
good stuff on
interesting
there.
guy.
So as things progress, anyway, the band do take on distinct roles. So you've got Jim, who's hating the manipulation of the PR and the promotion game, and just wants to write and perform music. Dave goes from being slightly goofy, just wanted to look at birds' knickers, to a massive dickhead who makes their mate Russell comes on as a roadie, doesn't he? And then becomes their road manager. But Dave just is awful to him. Noddy just argues constantly with Dave about aspects of the performance and has his arguments with Jim about the music. Don gets all the best lines, and one of his best lines and scenes in the film is when he visits his old boss in the sit at the canal. And Harold, his boss, says, "All the fish are gone. Now it's just turds coming down here like bloody coal barges." So that toilet and shit motif pops up again. It's beautifully evocative of just how shit industrial towns had got by the 1970s and how polluted and horrible they were. But Don's character, Charlie, says, "You make a few records, that's all right, but the rest is just bleeding gangsters in dinner jackets." It's fucking great. It's just brilliant. Just while they're sat there at this shitty canal staring at how filthy it all is.
And there's the close-up on Don's face. And his eyes, he's got those amazing piercing blue eyes, which I think is that thing where you say where he's like he's half in a dream and he's half like incredibly intense. It's a really, compelling look he's got, and that is great. Yeah,
fascinating to watch, isn't he? Absolutely fascinating to watch. I do apologise to anybody from the Midlands, by the way, for that terrible.
Well, I'm from the East Midlands, which is obviously completely different from the West Midlands, which is where they are.
Okay, I apologise to anybody from Wolverhampton.
Yeah. Well, that's
anybody from that neck of the woods. But nevertheless, as a band, they're a flaming success. But trouble's afoot when Harding shows up at a corporate party for the band, and that clash of culture comes into play. The public schoolboy with a trust fund and the hard-bitten, low-rent promoter and businessman. And Jack shows up too. I think this is not Jack's last appearance in the movie, but probably his second to last appearance in the movie.
Last, yeah.
Yeah. It's quite a sad, sweet character, really, even more so in the book, because you get a sense in the book that he holds no grudges against the band for taking flight without him. And he even has a sense of pride, because, again, you get that point of view thought process from Jack, which is really nice. But he takes a lift from Seymour, and it's articulated in the book, but not in the film, exactly what's to come and what he ends up doing. But the conflict between Seymour and Harding shows them being cynical and exploitative as each other. It's just one's got better tailoring but completely misjudges the other. And the band begins to disintegrate due to cynicism and disagreements, comes to a head at the hotel. Stoker and Paul have this, Noddy and Jim, have this quick conversation in a hotel lift, and that's it, the band's done. And it all happens extraordinarily quickly in the film. It's got a little bit more flesh on the bones in the book. But observation, watching the film this time, and I've never noticed this before, they're leaving the concert hall, they're coming down some steps, and Angie passes Stoker what is obviously a big unlit spliff. But other than that, there is absolutely no drug taking in the film.
There's one other reference, actually, which I only caught today, where they're in the back of the car, and similarly, I think a joint has been passed to somebody, and Noddy says, "Roll the windows up, we don't want to get in trouble." And I thought at first it was to do with the fans, but I think it's to do with the joint. Could be wrong, but that was how I took it.
So it's another example of where it feels like there's little bits missing. There are a couple of scenes that cut so abruptly. One of them's much earlier in the film. It's when Noddy is at the market, so he's selling tat at the market. That's his job, and he says he makes twice as much money working on the market as he does, playing for Roy Priest and the Undertakers. And there's a really odd cut where it really feels like something was torn out. It could have been an episode of Bad Language or whatever it was. Because, of course, in the book, you've got Dave and Noddy calling each other cunts on several occasions.
Yeah.
So there's some quite choice language in the book. But, yeah. So it all just kind of piled very quickly to a finish. It's like, I can't remember what it was. I think it was Miles who said, when we were talking about something, said, when you're watching The Keep, you think, right, we've got the setup now. This is really going to get cracking. And then you look at the running time, there's 20 minutes left. and this is what this film is like. It's got this long, beautiful setup, and then all of a sudden it's like, boom.
Yeah.
The band breaks up in a lift.
Yeah.
And 3 minutes later, the film's over.
Yeah, exactly. Like I mean, even in the book, it seems quite truncated that they've done a couple of tours. They've managed to get some singles out, 2 albums out in this time, and then it's kind of all over. Or they're gonna. It's almost because, I mean, in the film they play their first gig. I mean, and then they get signed. So there's no sense that they've actually had chance as a group to grow into each other. They're like immediately under all these kind of weird pressures. And again, that comes out in the book. You know, it talks about how it's very difficult to actually understand the type of pressure that bands in their position come under. You know, if you're not in that position, it's just, and for working class lads, suddenly having to kind of navigate this kind of new world as well is also a little bit of a theme in the book that perhaps isn't so strongly brought out in the film.
But, even the end of the film is like boom. Harding because Harding, Seymour finds out that he's no match for Harding, sadly. Although there is a scene in the film that I don't think is in the book where Seymour says to Devlin, maybe it's time to cut and run.
Yeah.
Whereas in the book, it's very much the case that they're nowhere near even recouping their investment at this stage.
No.
And there's stuff in the film that isn't in the book, like going shopping for a Rolls Royce, or this idea that the band have suddenly got really, really rich. In the book, there's no sense of that. The sense is that Seymour has still got the band on a short leash because they're not even at a point yet where they're going to start recouping any of the massive outlay that they've made to actually get the band together. But Seymour does find that Nice Taylor in a cut glass accent are sufficient weaponry to match the shittiness of Harding. And I think this is one of the things where you can see what Seymour's not much better of a person than Harding is, because we've not talked about what happens to poor Jack. And Jack stole the contract from Harding's office. In the book, he goes on the run. He goes on the lam with his money in his van for a couple of weeks, but then gets homesick. He goes around the country shagging and spending money, and then gets homesick and comes back to get laid by a lass that he's in contact with. And while he's taking dirty Polaroids of her in the back of his van, Harding's heavies find him. And it's pretty unpleasant in the movie, to be honest, because the insinuation is that they use a shovel to cut off his toes. But in the book, he's naked. There are lots of references to his flaccid penis. He gets battered in the nuts by a shovel handle. And so you get all that stuff with him on the run, on the lam, then he's caught. There's 4 very tense pages that may well be the main reason why Warner Brothers insisted that the novelization was withdrawn from sale in cinemas that were showing the film, because it was too sexual and too violent. Because those four pages are the most brutal and most NEL 70s novel like in the entire book. It's really difficult reading. And poor Jack.
Jack. It's funny that scene. I mean, is a brilliant scene. The way it's done in the film. I have to say, I absolutely love the 2 henchmen in it.
Yeah.
Their performances of subtle menace. They're actually not just kind of stage heavies. They're actually, it makes it all the more kind of unpleasant what happens to him. Just like he tries to get away, they grab him, and then suddenly it's the sharp action with the spade going down on his feet, which of course you don't even really see, but what's happened.
Yeah. Well, I think it was that script writer that you mentioned who, when they were filming that in the film, they were casting for Harding's heavies, said, don't get big lumbering blokes, because the hardest bloke in Newcastle, Dave Finlay, is 5'4" and 12 stone wet through, and is the most intimidating, nasty bloke you could ever meet in your life, and that's what these people are like. So in the film, you get one guy who just looks like a normal guy, and the other guy's this weird, skinny, lanky bloke with a pencil-like head and blonde hair. But they are both really sinister and threatening. Yeah. The other lovely thing is in the book, you get more Jack Daniels in a chapter as he convalesces, and the book gives more of a sense of passage of time, which is lacking in the film. And he gets visited in hospital. I can't. Is it Don Powell's? Is it Charlie who goes to visit him? I can't remember.
I think there's the thing that he just gets given a pot plant or something. But Harding visits him as well.
Yeah.
Which is, so, it's kind of quite unusual. And then he has this kind of fantasy, I think, a bit later about how he's going to take the band under his wing again. But then that particular section ends with him taking some pills that he's obviously been put on. And it says it's just at the end, and then that idea kind of went a bit out of his head.
Yeah.
It's the idea that he's kind of on such strong painkillers that he's kind of fantasizing a bit.
I think it's really lovely that, I mean, it's not lovely because he had a fucking awful time and they did terrible things to him. But those couple of pages where he's convalescing in the hospital are, I really, really like the character of Jack Daniels in the book.
Mm.
You know, he's a bit sad, he's a bit of a loser, but he's chasing the dream, you know, and it just never goes right for him.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, that's literally how the book ends, isn't it? It says, that he's actually the spirit of rock and roll who hasn't given up. Whereas the rest of them have had this amazing taste of fame and success and have kind of almost fallen at the first fence.
Yeah,
whereas he's kind of keeping going.
It's really lovely. It's so he's talking to Paul right at the very end, and Jack says, "I'm moving up to Liverpool next month, forming a group with a mate of mine who used to play with King Size Taylor. We're going to get something started in the clubs up there again. It's just like one big fucking hangover up there now. We're going to be like, Hair of the Dog. That's what we're going to call ourselves." Paul shook his head and felt his heart swell. "You're a fucking incurable, Jack. Do you know that? One of these days, someone's going to write the true story of rock and roll. It's not going to be about Elvis Presley or the Beatles or anyone else like that. It's going to be some bloody nutter like you who sacrificed his life for it. You know what you are, Jack. You're a right rock and roll bastard." Jack Daniels cried openly, feeling no shame.
Oh. Rock and roll bastard, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And really, the book is really Jack Daniels' story, more than the band. Yeah, and there's the other interesting coda in the book, chapter 10, which is one paragraph, which says, "In New Musical Express the following week, a short paragraph appeared below a photograph of the group. It was widely rumoured this week that Flame have broken up following the departure of bass guitarist Paul Harris at the end of their successful tour. However, a spokesman for the group, Tony Devlin, denied these rumours and stated that Harris's departure would not affect the group's plans. He said Harris had left because of musical differences," which kind of undercuts the freeze frame on Harding at the end of the film and the black and white shots of the band with "How Does It Feel" playing.
Yeah, I mean, that line, I think, is a callback to an earlier bit in the book where it basically says that thing where they say that people left because of musical differences is always bollocks. It's always something else. You don't know what's going on in bands. It's four people, the interpersonal relationships. That's why things break down. It's very rarely because somebody wants to do jazz rock instead. It's usually something else. So that was quite funny at the end.
So I think we should talk about the album briefly as well, because obviously the album was written for the film.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result, it's got some interesting stylistic swings, like having them kind of monkeys can't swing, and This Girl and Far Far Away. And How Does It Feel as the opening track, and How Does It Feel? I think in Noddy's words, he said, "If Merry Christmas, everyone, is about how every man feels at Christmas, How Does It Feel is about how every man feels the other 364 days of the year," which is fucking brilliant.
It's an amazing song. I mean, it really is. Kind of one of the great songs probably of the 70s. And certainly, not this is a particular yardstick, but Noel Gallagher has certainly said that. Oasis have certainly taken quite a lot from that song over the years, as in terms of it's a brilliant piece of songwriting and arrangement. And
in order to provide some balance, to the Gallagher, apparently Kurt Cobain loved Slade as well.
Okay,
so there you go. According to the book, whatever happened to Slade. So general feelings on the novel then. I mean, would you recommend it to people?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think I was reading somewhere. Where was I reading this? Somewhere said, John Pidgeon he completely deviated from the screenplay. And I'm thinking, no, he didn't actually. I mean, a lot of it is actually quite similar to what's in the film, but it's actually all of the extra stuff that he puts in that's interesting. So, for instance, in the film, you've literally got them do the scene with Seymour and say, okay, we're going to do it. And the next thing, they're on the boat out to the radio station, whereas in the book, there's a sense of them actually making some music, but also there's that publicity stunt where they're in the 4 phone booths, and and the idea is that they're just gonna let some smoke canisters off and take some pictures, and then Don or Charlie is involved in this thing where the PR guy, who we only see briefly in the film, but is actually in the book a lot more, is kind of pulling him out of the phone booth, going, "Oh my God, you've been terribly burnt. Quickly, I must take you to hospital." And he's going, "What? No, I'm not. I'm all right."
And they wrap him up in gauze bandages for a photo shoot.
They wrap him up like a mummy for the photo shoot, and so that's pretty funny in itself. But it also, at least, it means that it's not, like you say, just suddenly they're doing the kind of radio station thing. There's a bit more space in it, a bit more width.
Of course, it's the fire station stunt in the
film. So you're right. Yeah, there's a fire station.
That's not in the book, is it?
Done. That's not in the book, no. But that, I think, does that come out? That comes after the radio station, because it's only after the radio station thing that they're introduced to the PR guy when they go back to Seymour's house. And the PR guy actually gets a couple of great scenes in the book, and you can then really tell that John Pidgeon, who was a music journalist as well at the time, he used to write for the NME, so his kind of inside track on how music PRs and journalists were in this symbiotic relationship really comes over quite nicely in the book. So I really like those bits as well.
Yeah, and in the book, Summers, the PR guy, is the guy who has the relationship with Mulher, who owns the pirate radio station, who's able to set all that stuff up in the first place. Yeah, so Summers definitely gets more action in the book. I think the book has that extra layer. It adds that extra layer of special sauce. And it's funny when you read it, and I'm always, whenever I read these books, I'm never too far away from judging it as a one-shit book. And this is barely more than a one-shit book. You could read this really fucking quickly. It's about the length of a 70s NEL propulsive page turner. It's violent, it's dark, it's evocative. The characters, outside of Jack Daniels, aren't well-drawn or textured, but the situation absolutely is. It's brilliant, and if it hadn't been a novelisation of a major movie to promote a colossally successful pop rock band, I think it'd sit right in that sweet spot that all the best gritty NEL novels occupied. But what the film lacks, it fills in for. What the film has that it lacks is the visual texture, so the housing estates, the band, the performances. So I think as a result, for me, it's the perfect accompaniment to the perfect rock business film, in that neither feels complete without the other. They each complement the other perfectly, and that's what a novelisation should do for a film. But unlike a lot of novelisations, well, I suppose it's said for all novelisations at the end of the day, Alan Dean Foster was knocking out a bazillion film novelisations in the 1980s, but at the end of the day, you could read the novelisation of the thing, but you didn't get to see Rob Bottin's special effects. So
exactly.
It all comes down to the same kind of thing, doesn't it? But I think if you like the film Slade, if you like the film Flame, we call it Slade in Flame now.
Slade in Flame,
Yeah, but that old VHS cover, no, Flame. Starring Tom Conti and Alan Lake.
That is so funny. But I think you're right. I think just the performances in the film are all so good. I mean, it was funny reading the novel, because obviously I'd seen the film before, so you tend to kind of then retrofit the kind of, when the characters are speaking, you've got kind of like, Noddy and Don in your mind when they're kind of talking. But yeah, it definitely does add an extra layer that if you're really into this film, then you absolutely should seek this out. And as you said, it only had one publishing run, but I think it was 250,000. It was the biggest kind of run for Panther at the time. So
as a result, these are freely and easily available places like eBay. And when I picked up the copy that I sent to you, it was in as good condition as mine. The ones I've picked up have been in great nick as well. So my God, if you like this film, get this fucking novelisation, because it's great. Highest recommendation. Yeah. It's a shame, really, that, because when you think about how Slade felt about it, Dave reckons it ended them as a force. Jim and Noddy are proud of it.
I think that it's a bit of a kind of red herring, to be honest, because, the film came out early 75. Far, Far Away was a big hit. That got to number 2. I think How Does It Feel only got to number 15. But still, I mean, I think they were still on a bit of a roll. But what really killed it for Slade, like I say, is that they then took off to the States and literally lived in the States for 18 months and made the classic Brit band trying to break the States mistake. I mean, that's actually what killed them.
Yeah, the kids moved on, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, the kids moved on and punk happened. Get over it, Dave. Yeah. But, Jim and Noddy are proud of it. And it only took them until 76 to record a song about it. They did a B-side called Can You Just Imagine, which I think ended up on the CD versions of Nobody's Fool. But that's quite a decent song with interesting lyrics. But as Jim and Noddy were the songwriters, it didn't really include anything of Dave or Don's feelings about it. So, yeah, maybe Dave wrote a poem about it or something. Yeah, you know what? What a pleasure it has been to talk about this film, Joe, and lovely to have you back on again. And also, I think we've ended up talking about a number of things which probably will end up on this podcast at some point in the future, including Rollerball, Zardoz.
I'm making a note now. Yeah.
Yeah. Performance.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have to rewatch Privilege.
Yeah. Privilege. Yeah. Me too as well. That's a really interesting film, which I don't think enough people know about. Even people who are, kind of into music films like this, they might have seen Flame, but they probably won't have seen that. And that is a very interesting film.
Yeah, one for the future, definitely. Yeah. And I know where it is because it's in my cupboard with all my BFI Blu-rays, whereas just about every other Blu-ray in this house, I ain't got a fucking clue where it is because it's probably buried under things. Yeah. Well, thanks again, Joe. Great to talk to you. And tip us off as to the publication. If we don't record again in the meantime, tip us off as to the publication date of your Peter Hamill novel. Book.
Yeah, well, some when it comes out, some may feel that there are fictional elements to it, but there aren't. It's all the truth, honest Gov.
Yeah. Well, another Moorcock connection. Someone once sent me a black and white picture of Peter Hamill and said he looks like a perfect Elric, and I think they had a point.
He's actually there is one Hamill Van de Graaff review that talks about Moorcock. I think I forwarded it to you actually when I came across it. And their 1975 album, again 75, God Bluff, has a very Moorcockian atmosphere, in my opinion. So there you go.
Right, one to dig out then.
One to dig out, definitely.
Well, cheers, Joe. Another fantastic recommendation. We'll catch you next time.
All right, nice to speak to you.
Well, babe, we have just watched Slade in Flame on our brand new BFI Blu-ray disc.
I have to say, having watched it before not that long ago, and then seeing the Blu-ray, it's very good. I thought.
It's nice, isn't it? They've done a good job, haven't they?
Yeah.
So, Slade in Flame. We watched this together for the first time, probably in the region of 7 or 8 years ago, I reckon.
Yeah, it was a while.
Yeah, but before that, what was Slade to you?
Slade to me were Merry Christmas, everyone, and probably Come On Hear the Noise.
Yeah.
That's probably about it.
Yeah. When I first suggested to you, let's watch this Slade movie, what were you expecting?
I was like, okay. I'm being honest. I'm being honest.
Yeah.
I was like, it's not really my cup of tea.
Yeah.
But I love watching movies, so it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good, gritty film.
Yeah.
But from the first time we watched it, I absolutely love Slade.
Yeah.
Especially the soundtrack. I listen to it so often.
Yeah. Yeah, you do. You listen to it all the time, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a cracking album.
It's an amazing, and even now listening to it, every song, I just love it.
What is it about that kind of film that floats your boat?
It's just really down to earth. You know that it's down to earth people, and obviously they're a band, but it just feels very northern, very gritty, very you know, like seeing Seymour's guy knocking on Stoker's grand's door. She wouldn't even open the door, snatch the letter as they were trying to close the street.
Yeah.
And as we talked about earlier, you knew about things like that happening in the streets, and I know my mum and Nana used to talk about it, streets we used to live, but it's been knocked down. Number of places that were knocked down.
Yeah.
So it just felt very real in that respect.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Where your mum lives and where, of course, your mum and dad lived, and the house you grew up in was probably built in the 1960s or 70s. When was that house built?
when we moved in, it had only been up there 2 years.
Right, so how old were you when you moved into that house?
2.
Right, okay, so it was 1970 build. Or maybe built late 60s.
66,
Yeah.
65, 66.
Yeah, so I think Grimsby, much like Hull, will have had those kind of areas, which was 2 up, 2 downs, a living room, a kitchen, an outside toilet, and 2 bedrooms upstairs, and that was it. No bathroom, no fitted bathroom, no tin bath in the yard. Do you remember standalone washing machines when they became a thing, which was like a
twin tub.
A twin tub.
We had a twin tub.
A twin tub. Yeah, I remember my nana having a twin tub and a big pair of tongs.
The tongs.
The big wood tongs. Yeah.
It was amazing how many of my T-shirts that my mum didn't like got eaten in it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's wild to remember, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just something really down to earth and gritty and northern about the whole thing. And we've watched a few films over the years that have had those kind of settings. And we watched that film not so long ago, didn't we, with Nicole Williamson, where he goes back to the north to Newcastle. His dad's about to die, and his dad dies when he's there, and it's got a similar kind of feel. It's The Reckoning.
Yeah.
The club scenes, they're so similar, like drenched in cigarette smoke, and you can almost smell this film, and you can almost smell those films, that they'll all smell of Players Number 6 and Senior Service.
And stale beer.
Yeah, and sherry. Yeah.
Well, this is it, and some of the glasses that they use, and it was like talking about, we'll go and have a baby sham.
Yeah.
It's of its time.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, I have to say, because obviously having seen it the first time many years ago, and then reading the book, it's obviously a bit darker.
Yeah, of course, because you read the book as well, didn't you?
Yes, I read the book.
Wonderful thing about the book, as I discussed with Joe, is you get more Jack Daniels.
Yes.
And Alan Lake was so good in that film. But what about the performances of the band and the actors in it? Because that was Tom Conti's first film.
Was it?
Yeah, Alan Lake was fairly well established as an actor, because, of course, Diana Dawes' husband. Yeah.
Do you know, I recognised him, and now you've said that, yeah.
He was in tons of telly. He was in things like Z Cars, all sorts of British TV, in a few films. But more famous probably at the time in Britain for being married to Diana Dawes.
Yeah.
And quite a sad case, Alan Lake, really, because obviously he gave it everything as an actor, and he never half-assed anything in anything he was ever in. But after Diana Dawes died, he really, really struggled, and he was an alcoholic anyway, a really, really hard drinker, and he struggled terribly after Diana Dawes died, and then he took his son to the railway station, went home and took his own life because he couldn't live without Diana Dawes. So, yeah, very sad character. But I love him in that film, and it's a shame that you didn't get the additional scenes that you get with him in the book. But what about Slade as actors? Because I discussed this with Joe, but just watching it again on Blu-ray, and I was giving it specific attention just to observing them as actors. They're bloody good, aren't they?
They are. They really are. Dave Hill is obviously very flamboyant, which he was throughout the whole... Well, probably still is.
Yeah.
I don't know if they still do tours anymore.
He still performs as Dave. I think he originally reformed Slade as Dave Hill's Slade and then just tours as Slade.
Yeah.
They still do a Christmas show in Hull every year. Yaki goes every year.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe we should go.
Yeah. Well, Yaki's tried to tempt me quite a few times over the years, but there's no Noddy, there's no Jim Lee.
Oh, maybe not then.
Don Powell was playing for him up until 4 or 5 years ago, but then he had some physical health problems, so he got sacked.
Oh, really?
so it's now just Dave Hill and a bunch of ringers.
That's very harsh on someone you've been in a band with all those years.
Yeah.
To sack because he gets ill.
It is a bit. Yeah, I think they do a really fantastic job in that film. The scene in the pigeon loft with Noddy and Jim. I think it's so naturalistic and easy. Yeah. I mean, obviously, by that point when they made that film, Slade had been going probably 6 years. They're probably still only in their mid to late 20s. It's really weird looking at Noddy older and thinking of Noddy being in his mid 20s.
Yeah.
Because you just look at Noddy, don't you, and think.
He always looks like he's always looked like that.
Yeah, he's always looked like a 45-year-old guy with giant bugger grips. Yeah, it's really strange.
It's like the John Thor scenario, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, you look 45, even though apparently you're 36 in real life.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that their first acting?
That's their first and only.
Wow.
Yeah.
You've got to give all 4 of them then.
Yeah.
Kudos for that.
Yeah. I think they all do a really good job. It only really struck me this evening, but watching Don, the drummer, he, with that sort of quiet intensity and his occasional little one-liners, he really, really reminds me of Stevie Mac.
Does he?
Oh, only struck me tonight. Yeah. So, yeah, Stevie Mac, a friend of mine from back in the day who died last year. Shouldn't get emotional on podcasts, should you? Anyway, on a different note, Joe recommended 2 David Essex films. That'll Be the Day.
Yeah.
And Stardust, both films from the 70s, both similarly surprisingly gritty and very, very of their time, both from the same production team. So, gird your loins. Not that you're a girl, you don't tend to have loins as such, but brace yourself. They're available on Blu-ray, and I'm going to buy them. So we're going to do a David Essex, well, maybe a David Essex triple bill, because there's Silver Dream Racer.
You see, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
I've heard of Stardust. I don't think I've heard of the first one.
So That'll Be the Day is the first film he did when, and it's about an up-and-coming pop star. And I think Stardust is about him when he's a more established pop star. Silver Dream Racer has nothing to do with the first two. Yeah. It's David Essex as a motorcycle racer with Beau Bridges as other. I think it's Beau Bridges his pit crew. I can't remember.
I can actually picture that.
Yeah.
So I think I have seen that one.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever seen That'll Be the Day or Stardust, but I have seen Silver Dream Racer.
Yeah.
And, at the risk of repeating myself, we watched it with a babysitter, and all I really remember is the babysitter crying for an hour afterwards. Because it's got quite a sad ending.
Which one's that one?
Silver Dream Racer.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, so we very much enjoyed watching our Slade in Flame again, didn't we?
We enjoyed watching the film again. Yep. We love the quality of the Blu-ray.
Yep.
And as I say, watching the film made me appreciate and listen to a lot more Slade. So, winner.
Yeah, and not only that, but we have now twigged, thanks to me reading the Slade in Flame 50th anniversary book which finally arrived. It arrived after I recorded with Joe, but Chris Selby and Ian Edmondson's Slade in Flame at 50 book.
Yeah.
There is a transcript in here of an interview with Tom Conti where he explains that one of the scenes in that film was filmed in Derry and Toms roof garden.
Fantastic.
So there is another connection to Moorcock and to this podcast, which brings it firmly in scope. There you go.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks, baby, and we will very shortly be doing a David Essex triple bill. Huzzah!
Huzzah! Here's to the next one.
Yeah. Massive thanks to Joe for taking the time out of his busy schedule to drop by Derry and Toms and talk about Flame. Joe's books on Hawkwind, Days of the Underground, Radical Escapism in the Age of Paranoia, and Sideways Through Time, An Oral History of Hawkwind in the 1970s, are published by Stranger Tractor Press and are available now. And his article celebrating the 50th anniversary of Warrior in the Edge of Time was the cover feature for the April edition of Prog magazine, so grab that while it's still available. And we will, of course, keep you updated on his next book release too. But in the meantime, it's just time to thank our patrons. First, those without tier: Anthony Piconti, Tim Cardos, Dave Dempster, and Sebastian Weetabix. And our Chaos Engineers: Ed Von Stout, Andrew Cicluna, Andrew Spong, Andrew Van Ness, Anthony Porter, Benjamin Fletcher, Ben Hagar, Brandon Mays, Dan Charnley, Dave Griffiths, Dave Voxman, Gabriel Laycock, Harvey Faulkner-Aston, Jim Kirkland, Jim Jupp, John W. Lays, Jules Lawrence, Mal Pertwee, Matt Saltz, Michael Hopwood, Nick Hopkinson, Ofer Ziv, Paul McRandall, PJ Cooper, Scott Butler, and Simon Perrins. And of course, thanks to our crafty jugaderos, Adrian Tchaikovsky, Alexander Harris, Brian Henderson, Chris Sharp, Christian Hundal, Graham Holden, Kevin Williams, Liam Toner, Loz, Mark Buckley, Mark Taylor, Matthew Broom, Murray Palmer, Sean Twist, Toby White and Taylor Lavery. An eternal thanks to our patron demons, Action Edmonds, Alistair Davison, Andrew Clark, Andy Darby, David Lee, Derek Clunan, Fred Quiche, Gareth Wilson, Glenn Sawyer, Greg Faulkner, Gwen Barlow, Ian Stead, Janie Stim, Jason Vogel, Joachim Sund, Joe Monty, Johan Jarper, Jonathan Sharp, Lee Gary, Marius Latauskas, Mark Hebden, Miles Reed-Labato, Neil Burton, Paul Hillary, Randall Gatlin, Steve Round, Tom Murphy, Tony Malazzo, the OG patron Norman Beresford, and last but never least, Robert McMillan. That's enough from me. Don't forget you can follow us on Instagram Blue Sky with the handle @BreakfastRuins. You can email us at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The webpage is breakfastintheruins.com. Breakfast in the Ruins Radio is live on Radio Garden or via the web player at breakfastintheruinsradio.blogspot.com. We have our Patreon page too, of course, and there are a few extra odds and sods on there. But until next time, take care, stay safe, and we will meet again soon on the Moonbeam Roads.